I mean, I'm sure everyone will agree it's a very, very powerful and harrowing film in many places. And it kind of, for me, it really evokes outrage and anger. And I know that you actually felt the same during that. That even now you've seen it so many times, but obviously you made it. But you actually literally needed to walk out during the film because you still felt that anger.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you channel that into such an incredible film?
Yeah, I guess when making the film, firstly, thank you everybody for coming again, and appreciate you staying around for the Q&A. I think when making the film, it was in the moment of the pandemic. So I guess we had that layer of stress around us anyway because we had a global pandemic. And I think that diverted my attention somewhat to what I was actually making and creating. And I think because I was making this film from March 2020, it kind of felt like the pandemic was there and that was our major issue. And then as I was filming this film and making this film and finding the story, I didn't realize actually how big this film was and the impact that it could potentially have and the impact that it has had. And I think that when I watch the film now, and I know when we know what's happening today with our current arrangement and the current situation in the world with war and persecution and refugees, we watch this film and you just think, why are we not moving on? I mean, I feel that by watching this film with this story, that this was, shot over an 18-month period. It released September 2021, but we're just not moving on. And I think that's why I got angry today, because the themes in the film regarding immigration and asylum seekers and refugees, and we're now in war in Europe and things are not moving on. So yeah, I find it difficult to watch. I have a mixture of anger, upset. I grieve a lot when I watch the film also because my mom's in the film. And watching that scene of the partition of India and Pakistan and people walking because of a line that was drawn to separate India, old India, and then to think right now people are crossing borders from Ukraine and from Russia for safety. And you think that's 47, we're now 2022. Why are we not moving on? So I think that's why I got angry today, because the themes in the film are just so relevant, and they have been so relevant for so many years.
Yeah, and you're speaking there of the Radcliffe line in 1947, and it's a very powerful symbol of division and how colonialism actually implemented all of that. This film wasn't actually originally about the hostile environment policy. You didn't start off with an intention of making that. It ended up becoming that. What was the original intention of the film, and how did it evolve into what it is now?
Yeah, I guess the original idea for the film was really about my upbringing, about my parents. I would never have made a film if there hadn't have been a global pandemic. And it was only during that time I started thinking about my parents and their contribution to society, not only economically, but culturally. They came in the 50s, that sort of wave of migration kind of post-war, where we needed migrants here to kind of build our NHS, provide work in the jobs that people wouldn't necessarily do. And my parents were part of that wave of migration. And when the pandemic struck, the people I was thinking about were the factory workers, the train drivers, the taxi drivers, the local convenience store who's run by an Asian family. And they became our reliance in society. And so for me, because I came from a migrant family and parents that were factory workers and ran a convenience store, I started to deeply reflect on my childhood and deeply reflect on their contribution to our society. And again, I don't just say economically, but culturally, and the value of them. And so I wanted to take to the streets and make a film about migrant communities keeping society moving during this global pandemic. And Daksha was my entry point to that. I found her story in the Kilburn Times, and I contacted her. And initially, she didn't really want me to film the kitchen, but then she realized that by filming what she was doing, I would be revealing a story of migrant communities, helping not just migrant communities, but all communities. And so she allowed me to do that. But when I met Daksha and I filmed Daksha, she was the one that that really told me about no recourse to public funds. It was the people that she was helping were the ones that were suffering from NRPF. And as I learnt about that, I then dug deeper into where does this come from? What is this about? And that's what exposed me to the hostile environment.
Right.
So it was really my filming journey. It was an extremely investigative process. The whole thing was about filming, learning, researching, and kind of cultivating the story as I was filming. And it was a really surreal process and a visceral process, but one that I thoroughly enjoyed, if that's the word to use.
Well, it's incredible how strongly the frustration of characters like Farouk Saeed come across. I mean, it was so. I mean, I really felt that from him. You know, watching him just banging his head against a brick door and you know, a brick wall and seeing, you know, as you said, the no recourse to public funds. I mean, the fact that he's just got no way of getting out of this hole that they just shove him into, and I just wonder, I mean, the characters you talked about, Daksha, there, I mean, tell me more about the characters. How did you discover them, and where are they now? What, you know, have their stories moved on since the film? What do we know about them since then?
So I guess with Daksha, finding her in the Kilbourne Times kind of opened my mind to this hostile environment. And then I thought, well, okay, I need to delve into this story more. And that's when Daksha introduced me to the international students, and then I met Ilyas. Daksha was actually living in the borough of Newham, and so her kitchen was in Brent. She lived in Newham. She told me about Ilyas, so I went to his food bank. And that's when I met the students, and I was thinking, hang on, they have no recourse to public funds. They're international students. Their fees had gone up by £18,000 in the last 5 years per year. So they're now paying £35,000 a year to be in this country, not just from India, but all over the world international students come from. But these particular students were from India and Pakistan. And I guess getting into their story and learning about their story, it was through Daksha and just through Ilyas. And then from there, I thought, well, these are students. What I really want to know is, right now, is there a person out there that was a student that came here that is now subject to this hostile environment? And Farouk's story was in The Independent. May Bullman broke his story. And here he was, been here for now 18 years, then 17 years, and came here as an international student, went to Manchester University to study computer science, and then has been, for the last 9 years, been fighting to stay in this country. He has limited leave to remain, but that he's not got indefinite leave to remain. So every 2.5 years, he has to pay £2,500 per person in his family, which also includes the NHS surcharge that he has to pay. And he also has no recourse to public funds. And so when he doesn't work, he doesn't have access to disability allowance, to the universal credit. He doesn't have access to the welfare state, basically. So he's basically screwed during that time. And so Farouk, I found from The Independent. And then when I was researching Farouk, there was a drama on TV called Sitting in Limbo. And that came out in, I think, June 2020. And that featured Anthony Bryan's story. It was about Anthony Bryan. And I watched that drama and I thought, well, hang on. The Windrush scandal really did bring the hostile environment to the forefront in 2017. And you'll probably know that Amelia Gentleman broke that story in 2017. So it was really important for me to get Anthony's story in there, because it felt like it was the seat, the kind of the bed of the film, to kind of expose the hostility that we have in the country, which goes back 5 decades to the time when my parents came, and post-Empire, etc. So I think that's why, and that's how I found the participants. Unfortunately now, they're all in pretty precarious positions. Farouk has yet again applied. He's just paid £2,500 per person to renew, to try and get his indefinite leave to remain. Doesn't know how that's gonna work out. Anthony got given 20,000 out of the 90,000. Now, Anthony hasn't really been able to work since 2017. He has mental health issues. Unfortunately, the week of our premiere in October, he lost his mother and he lost his son. So they both died. So he's not in a great place, Anthony. The students, I mean, they remained and are anonymous for a reason, because they are in a very precarious position, and that's all I want to say about that. And then Daksha's kitchen closed. She tried to set up another kitchen, but she failed. Although she was awarded an MBE for her services, she couldn't get a kitchen, right? So she would rather have the kitchen. And that whole thing kind of forced her out of London. She's now living in Milton Keynes, and I was with her last week. And she was crying at the Q&A last week because she's a year on from this, and the pain still is with her, that she feels like she's let down so many people. People like the students, people like Farouk, people like Anthony, that are suffering from the hostile environment, that just don't have any access to any support. And I think that's the thing about this film, is to kind of be on so many months later and then not to be a solution or a resolution to their story. Yeah.
With I mean, you were talking about the hostile environment, and the film's called Hostile, and yet you have Michael Gove yesterday in Parliament saying, "Oh, well, I'm sick and tired of hearing about this so-called hostile environment policy or whatever, and our government's nothing to do with that. We've been welcoming refugees." So he's saying all this stuff. Yeah. Tell us about the real history of the term, how it was coined, and the evolution of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Liam Byrne said the term hostile environment in 2007. I think what happened in New Labour time during 1999, Tony Blair, it was at that time where he was really limiting the rights of asylum seekers and refugees and introduced more restrictions around their rights. So yeah, Liam Byrne, Labour, then immigration officer at that time, did say the term. But hang on, in 2012 and 2013, Theresa May did coin that term and bring it to the forefront. And then Sajid Javid publicly said, well, we're not going to call it a hostile environment. We're going to call it a compliant environment. And it's like, well, hostile, compliant, aren't they the same thing? So I think that actually the term is very much in existence. They're both governments, all governments have been complicit in using this term and weaponizing this term in legislation, in bills, and in policies, and dividing society because of it. So it very much is part of the Conservative government as well as other governments. And I think, for him to say that just makes you think, well, actually, he's trying to cover something up. And, there's a lot of heat around the hostile environment now. And I think that's a good thing. And that's why this film is so important at this most critical point in history.
When you have this government conducting inquiries where they say that endemic racism or institutional racism doesn't exist, and then you have, another report that actually says that the police force is endemically racist. How much do you feel that this government is in denial about what's going on, and how much do you feel that there's manipulation of people in terms of understanding racism and doing something about racism?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these policies are driven by racist, sort of institutional racism. Now, whether they believe that they're racist or not is another thing. Whether I believe that the whole of the government is racist or not is another thing. I mean, I don't believe that. I just believe that it's a premise of successive governments and the voting behaviour, what people's appetites are at that time, how are we going to win votes, how are we going to gain votes. And a lot of those votes are based on divide and rule, are based on keeping us separated as opposed to bringing us together. And I think that's the thing about not just the current arrangement, but other governments and other leaders that we've had, is that instead of focusing on our similarities and what binds us as a society, they focus on the things that tear us apart, keep us apart, and therefore that's when things manifest like racism.
As a female British Indian filmmaker of Sikh heritage, I mean, how do you feel about glass ceilings and how do you punch through them? It's a big deal to actually make a film like this, and I know that there are too few British Asian filmmakers out there, but I'm amazed by how you've actually managed to power through a lot of those glass ceilings. I mean, tell me about that process.
It's been tough. I won't deny it. I mean, I set up Gale Force Films like 10 years ago. I mean, I must admit, I do have children. So the first 6 years, I was kind of balancing it with more being a mum than a filmmaker. But it has been tough. It is tough. I mean, this film was not funded by anyone. There were 3 of us in the end that funded this film because everybody said no. And I went everywhere. And that needs to be spoken about. How can a British Indian woman in her late 40s trying to make her debut film about a very important subject not get her film funded and by anyone? And I think that was extremely hurtful and still is today. Those times when I was filming Hostile and learning about the hostile environment, I felt myself, I was experiencing a little bit of that hostility within the film and TV industry. Not that I took it personally, because I also realized that they're extremely busy, that, you know, they get pitches all day long, and who am I? I'm an unknown. But I think there's something to learn from this when a filmmaker, you know, pushes through, gets a premiere at Rain Dance, gets longlisted for 3 BIFAs, gets longlisted for a BAFTA, has a cinema tour that's just going crazy, and yet couldn't get the funding. So I think there's probably a little thing that could be made of this to say, well, actually, we need to reconsider how we find talent and how we cultivate talent in our industry.
Mm. Well, one of the things that it really impressed me about your making this film was that you had 24 different versions of this film before you got to this one, which I find incredible. So, I mean, how did you distill all of that into this? You know, I mean, what was that process like?
So my process was, initially I spent the first 6 weeks just doing my assembly. So I watched every interview, and then I just highlighted all the main bits of every interview and put them on a timeline. So I told the story from A to Z with just the interviewees. And that was my script version 1. And then as I progressed with the storytelling, myself and my editor would just weave in the actuality and the archive. And it was like a jigsaw puzzle, kind of moving around scenes, creating the 3-act structure, knowing who the participants were and their story and their arc. So I think that it was just it was a process. And I think also I learned a lot about myself. You know, I'm quite forensic in the way that I work. I'm really into detail. I watched the cut every night during my edit. So I would leave the edit, go home, eat with my kids, be a mom for about half an hour because they hardly saw me. And then I'd work again till about 2 o'clock in the morning, just watching the cut fully all the way through every night. And sometimes that cut would be 3.5 hours. And then the next day I'd go into the edit with my thoughts on that cut and then redo it or realign things. So so we've got 24 versions of the script, and it's a beautiful thing to have that archive, really. Absolutely. To see the progress of the film.
And I mean, it's a harrowing watch. It's a very powerful watch. It's very intense in places, and it's I mean, I really feel for all the people who you've focused on. And currently we are in a situation, as we know, with Ukraine and so on. It's a very dark time in many ways. And I'd ask where you feel the hope is right now.
Yeah, you're right. It is a very dark time. And unfortunately, the hope for me, as I was filming Hostile, was with the people. You know, I'm so blessed to have you all here tonight. I know I've said that a lot, but people coming out and paying to see Hostile means so much to me. And I've had hundreds of people see this film every week and sell out screenings. And that's indicative of the wave of the movement right now. When I was filming Hostile, I was filming all the protests. And the police bill, that protest was the moment I thought, wow, it's happening. When you had the Green Party with Conservative, Labour, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, you had the Sikh community out, the Muslims out. It was like, wow, I'm in a moment right now where I see so many different communities coming together because of what's happening, the hostility and the hatred against the other, you know? So I felt like that was a moment in history for me. And I've seen that on my cinema tour, where we're getting diverse audiences coming out to see the film, and people that sit outside the choir, right? Not necessarily the people that always agree with what I'm doing. I've been challenged at Q&As talking about this, and I think that's also healthy. So it's like, that's where I see the hope from people. I see it at grassroots. And I know that probably sounds a bit like, well, okay, but there is a movement happening. And I think people power, like Zara Sulsena said, has won a lot before in the past. And I think people power is really prevalent now with what's happening with Ukraine, and people opening their doors to say, look, you can come to stay in my home, or look, I'm going to come and help you. I've got a cleaner that's from that country that went to Poland to pick up her nieces and nephews only 2 days ago. And she's telling me the real life trauma and stories that's happening on the ground with her family in Ukraine. It's devastating. And I think that this film shows how that hostility is working and the things that we can change to make life better for people like that.
Absolutely. And yet, one thing I would say is that we've still got the Nationality and Borders Bill. It's a crazy time because we've got that. At the same time, we're talking about Ukrainian refugees, and then you've got this insidious bill going through. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, that bill's crazy. Actually, I'd like to point out that the other day I was at 11 Downing Street. I was invited to International Women's Day, and initially I wasn't going to take the invite, but I thought, hey, I'm going to go see who's there. And I actually did meet Rishi Sunak, and I told him about this film, and I mentioned about the Nationality and Borders Bill briefly. It was a very brief conversation. What I can say about that bill is that you're absolutely right. How is it that we're in this moment and we have a bill trying to be passed through Parliament which restricts the rights of asylum seekers and refugees further by distinguishing between those that are good migrants and those that are bad migrants? Oh, the bad migrants come via the water, they've been trafficked. All the good migrants, they come through an organisation or they fly here. Yeah, we'll take those. And at the same time, we have this, so that's clause 11, I believe, of the Borders Bill, 9,
yeah,
clause 9. And then clause 11, you have a bill that's going to affect those that are eligible for dual citizenship and those people that, that are British citizens that could be deported without notice, without any reason.
So it's no right of appeal.
And no right to appeal. Yeah. So how is it that this moment in history we have that? And I think when I finished Hostile, I kept on thinking about what happens when that hostile environment turns on us all. And actually, you don't know this, I'm going to tell you this tonight, that the 23rd version of the film, I changed right at the last minute, and you said, and it was an ending where, watch out, they're coming for us. And it was you and Akram, and you ended the film, and it felt very scary, and it felt very real.
I am very scary.
And I thought, oh no, I need to end on some hope.
Fair enough.
So our campaign is really around food and, actually food is part of it, but it's around no recourse to public funds. And it's around that condition that's placed upon people's limited leave to remain. And no recourse to public funds affects 1.7 million people in our country, of which 10% are children. People are destitute, they're hungry, they don't have access to certain support and certain care. So really our campaign is around how do we make no recourse to public funds fairer for individuals that are suffering from it? And during the global pandemic, the government did give £3.5 billion to local authorities. But local authorities were in debt already before the pandemic. That money was eaten up with other things that they needed to pay off, So it's about giving the money in the places where people like those suffering from NRPF have options and opportunity to not be destitute. Also with NRPF, to become exempt, you have to qualify as being destitute. So how do you qualify as being destitute? That's really ridiculous. And then the other thing is the applications. It's very difficult to process and to read and fill in these applications. So our campaign is around helping people to have applications in the language that they can understand. So really our asks are around no recourse to public funds, but it's mainly highlighting the issues around NRPF, which is associated with the hostile environment, but also affects so many people in our country. And Stephen Timms is campaigning with us and for that also. And you know, that conversation between him and Boris was like 20 months ago. And unfortunately, he still does not have the answers because the Home Office just won't give him the answers. So it's transparency of information around NRPF. But, you know, we're working with organizations like JCWI, Human Rights Watch, different organizations, Praxis, that work in this kind of field. And I think it's really aligning yourself with those organizations, seeing what they're doing and supporting them, and giving them this film to use as a tool, really, to raise awareness. This film is about raising awareness and hopefully doing some good. So, yeah. Yeah, so to answer your question, yes, we are very much trying to get the film into Parliament. Stephen Timms is helping us. Other MPs are helping us to get it into Parliament. Obviously, they're very busy right now. We also have a couple of Lords that are helping us. Our aim is to get it into Parliament and also get it to the United Nations. I've already started talking to the UN about this film, and so it's just a matter of time, really. I've been quite busy with the cinema tour, but that's very much on my mind. And it is about creating, putting the divisions aside, whatever party you're from, and kind of coming together and seeing the very real realities of how the hostile environment affects people. And I think when people, decision makers and policy makers, and, you know, people are in the room and they're watching this, they might realize that actually this is really causing a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. I think in the response to Nitin's question, how do we change the minds? Well, I'm going to try and change it with the Chancellor and talk to him about no recourse to public funds and the cost implications to it, and also the implications on people's lives. So it's like he's now got the film, it's raising the awareness at those high-level decision makers, and also with the MPs, with the Lords, with community organisers. It's just we're trying to kind of like look at it in multi-layers, basically. But Parliament is definitely on our minds, 100%. I think, I think that's a very, first of all, right, we need to have more empathy, love, and understanding for people. And I think that's happened to me, right? It's kind of like what I witnessed in the film. I am a different person because of this film. I am not the same person I was in February 2020, or, you know, I am not that person anymore because of what I've experienced making this film. I have changed significantly. And it's understanding that those people, the individuals, the person on the bus, the person that's given you your vaccine that morning, the taxi driver, the Uber driver, all of these people may be subject to the hostile environment and having their issues at home that they're having to deal with, whether it's monetary, whether it's to do with deportation, any of those people. So the starting point for me, for you guys, is to have more empathy, love, and understanding for other people that are not from your background, that are not from your socioeconomic group, that are not from your community, and to start embracing them. Do it tomorrow. Do it tomorrow, please. And go to those communities and be with them and understand what they're doing and what they're fighting for. You know, I came from a very working class community. I still have the house that I grew up in. I can't let it go. It's rented out, even though I've lost my parents. But that is a reminder to me where I come from. And I always look back on my life and think, thank you so much to the experiences I had as a child, the experiences I experienced of being with people that struggle day in, day out, to put food on the table, to educate themselves, to have opportunity. You know, I broke from that, but I will never forget my past, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. So, you know, even now, I take myself out of the community I'm now in, which is a middle-class woman with 2 children and a Caucasian husband. Even now, I take myself out of that. So I think that's my advice to you guys. Secondly, you know, sure, you know, go and help a food bank, you know, look at organizations online, write to your MP, yeah? Write to your local MP, say that you watched the film and you cannot believe that 150,000 children are suffering from no recourse to public funds. write to the Children's Society, speak up, speak out, stand up and organise, join a protest. Sure, I'm still protesting. You know, young people are the future. You know, you can change this. So do what you can. But yeah, study though, that's the main thing.
Yeah, but I just want to say thank you so much to Sonita and to the BFI as well. Thank you.